When the alien emperor cast his obese daughter aside, deeming her worthless, the universe turned its back on her. But in the shadows of a forgotten space station, a human mechanic saw something different, a treasure, not a burden. What began as a simple act of kindness soon spirals into a journey that challenges the very fabric of intergalactic power. Will the human mechanic be able to change the fate of a princess cast out by her own father? Or will the galaxy's relentless cruelty prove too much for them both? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories that defy the odds, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The cold metal of the space station felt like an extension of her body, every step echoing through the hollow corridors as Princess Yzara wandered aimlessly. Exiled to the deepest corner of the galaxy, abandoned by her father, the alien emperor, she had become a ghost in her own life. Once revered, now discarded like scrap metal, her green skin, a symbol of her royal bloodline, was now a source of shame. She had been called obese, unworthy, and a burden by the very family she had been born to. The cruelty of her father's rejection still burned, but she had learned to bury the pain deep within her. The station, a forgotten relic of a once glorious empire, had no place for someone like her. There were no courtiers to tend to her, no servants to shield her from the cold stares of those who passed by. The people here were either too busy with their own survival or too far removed from the higher realms to care about her plight. She was left with only the shadows of her former life. But then, there was him, Darian, the human mechanic. He was a rough figure, unremarkable to most, but Yzara noticed the way he didn't look at her with the same pity that others did. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity in his gaze. He saw her, really saw her, in a way no one else had in years. The first time their paths crossed, Yzara had been scrubbing the station's floors, her hands raw from the constant work. Darian had approached her, not with sympathy, but with a quiet acknowledgement of her struggle. "You're doing a fine job," he had said simply, his voice rough but sincere. It's rare to see someone put in the effort. She had looked at him, unsure of how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not since her exile. "I don't have a choice," she muttered, her voice barely audible. His response was a simple nod. No one ever does, and that had been it. No grand speeches, no promises of rescue. Just two souls existing in a world that had long forgotten them. But in that moment, something shifted. Yzara realized that, perhaps, she didn't have to face the galaxy's cruelty alone. Maybe, just maybe, this human mechanic could offer her something more than what her father ever could: understanding. Days turned into weeks, and Princess Yzara found herself spending more time in the dimly lit repair bay where Darian worked. He didn't ask about her past. He never pried into her royal lineage or the tragedy that had unfolded. Instead, he gave her work tasks that kept her mind busy and her hands occupied. It was simple: fixing machines, cleaning tools, replacing parts. But it was a distraction she had come to crave. At first, Yzara struggled. Her royal training had prepared her for diplomacy and grace, not the mechanical intricacies of repair. But Darian was patient, always showing her the ropes, guiding her hands as she learned to wield a wrench with care. She began to enjoy the work, the rhythm of it, the way it allowed her to feel useful again. One afternoon, as they worked side by side on a rusted cargo ship's engine, Yzara found herself looking at him differently. His face, marked by the hardship of a life lived in the shadows, seemed familiar in its quiet strength. He wasn't much older than she, yet his experience in survival had shaped him into someone far wiser than any noble she had ever known. "You don't talk much about your past," Yzara said, her voice tentative. "What made you end up here?" Darian didn't look up from the engine as he worked, but his hands paused for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I guess I wasn't what they wanted me to be. Just like you." His words hung in the air for a moment, unspoken understanding passing between them. "My people abandoned me. I'm not much in their eyes, just another mechanic, another face in the crowd." Yzara felt a pang of sympathy for him. "I know how that feels," she said, her voice catching. To be seen as nothing, to be thrown away as if you never mattered. Darian's eyes met hers then, and for the first time she saw the weight of his past in his gaze. "You matter," he said simply. "You always have." Her heart skipped. For a moment, she forgot that she was a princess without a throne, without a kingdom. For a fleeting second, she was just a woman, someone who could be seen for who she was, not what she had been born into. As they worked on the ship's engine, Darian silently handed her a wrench. She took it without hesitation. The feeling of being truly seen, of being part of something, was more powerful than any crown or title ever could be. And for the first time since her exile, Yzara began to believe that perhaps there was hope for her after all. The hum of the station's power systems was a constant companion in the repair bay, but it never drowned out the quiet conversations that Yzara and Darian shared. As the weeks passed, they fell into a routine, Yzara working with Darian on repairs, her skills improving with each passing day, while he told her stories of the worlds he'd seen, of people he'd met, and of his years spent as an outcast. But the more time Yzara spent with him, the more she realized there was something strange about the station. The walls, lined with old technology and forgotten equipment, seemed to have been built with a purpose far beyond simple maintenance. There were passages that led to rooms she had never been shown, sealed doors that resisted any attempt to open them, and ancient consoles that hummed with power despite being untouched for centuries. One evening, after their shift, Yzara found Darian near one of these doors. It was an old maintenance hatch, hidden behind a wall of rusting pipes. His hands moved with practiced ease, peeling away the layers of grime that obscured the markings on the door. She watched him work, curiosity piquing her interest. "What's behind this door?" Yzara asked quietly, her voice laced with a sense of forbidden intrigue. Darian paused for a moment, glancing up at her. "You don't want to know," he said, his tone flat. But Yzara wasn't easily deterred. "Why not?" "It's just an old door." He shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's not just any door. This place, this station, it was built for something far more than just repairs." Yzara felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Before Darian could respond, the door creaked open with a sound that reverberated through the still air. Behind it, a dark corridor stretched into the depths of the station. The dim light of their flashlights flickered as they entered, revealing old high-tech machinery covered in dust. But what caught Yzara's attention wasn't the machinery, it was the walls. Carved into the walls were strange symbols, intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with energy. Yzara stepped closer, tracing her fingers over the symbols. "What is this?" she murmured, her voice a mix of awe and fear. Darian hesitated before answering. "It's a relic, a weapon or something close to it, built long before either of us were born. The station, it wasn't just abandoned, it was hidden, for a reason." Yzara's mind raced as she absorbed the information. If this station was hiding something so powerful, something the Emperor had kept secret for centuries, what did that mean for her, and why had Darian never told her about it? But before she could ask more, a low rumble shook the station. The ground beneath them vibrated. Darian's eyes widened. "They're coming," he whispered, urgency in his voice. "We need to leave. Now." As they scrambled to retreat, Yzara's heart pounded in her chest. There was more to this station, more to her own exile than she had ever imagined, and it seemed as though the secrets were about to be unleashed. Yzara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed after they stumbled upon the hidden corridor. The hum of the station seemed louder now, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets she wasn't meant to hear. And though she tried to focus on her work alongside Darian, her mind kept returning to the strange symbols, the ancient machinery, and the sense that something larger was at play. The next morning, as they repaired a communication relay in a quiet corner of the station, Yzara noticed something unusual. A group of officers from the Emperor's fleet had arrived, their black and silver uniforms gleaming in the station's dim light. At first, they seemed to pay no attention to her. She was nothing more than a discarded princess, a non-entity. But as they passed, one officer's eyes lingered on her for just a moment too long. Yzara stiffened, but she quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. "They're watching me," she murmured to Darian, her voice tight. Darian glanced up from his work, his brow furrowing. Who? The Emperor's men. They don't belong here, and I don't think they've just come for routine inspections. Darian wiped his hands on his jumpsuit and met her gaze. What are you thinking? Yzara bit her lip, her mind racing. She hadn't realized until now that the Emperor's spies might still be tracking her, even in this forgotten corner of the galaxy. But if they were here for her, it wasn't just for her exile. Something far more dangerous was brewing, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. I think it's time we found out exactly what's behind those walls, Yzara said, her voice low and resolute. I want to know what the Emperor is hiding. Darian hesitated. Are you sure about this? Once you open that door, there's no going back. Yzara's heart raced, but she felt an undeniable pull to uncover the truth. I've already lost everything. What more can they take from me? Darian sighed, a mix of reluctance and respect in his eyes. Then we're in this together. That night, they returned to the hidden corridor. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dark, echoing passage. This time, however, they weren't alone. As they crept deeper into the station, they heard the unmistakable sound of boots marching in the distance. The Emperor's soldiers were closing in, searching for something, or someone. Yzara quickened her pace, her pulse pounding in her ears. We have to hurry, she whispered. I don't know how much time we have. They reached the hidden chamber at the heart of the station, and Yzara's breath caught in her throat. The strange symbols on the walls now glowed faintly, as if recognizing her presence. The machinery, dormant for so long, hummed to life with a low, vibrating thrum. A voice echoed through the chamber, one she hadn't heard in years. Her father's voice, harsh and commanding. She cannot be allowed to continue this path. Destroy the station. Leave nothing behind. Yzara froze. The Emperor knew. He had always known. And now, she realized, it was not just her fate at risk. It was the fate of the galaxy. The sudden silence that followed the Emperor's command echoed through the hidden chamber. Yzara's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the enormity of what was happening. Her father had known of the station's secrets all along. And now, as his orders reverberated through the air, she understood that she was no longer merely a discarded princess. She was a threat. Darian, Yzara whispered, her voice tight with fear. They're coming. He's sending them after us. Darian looked at her with wide eyes, his face pale in the dim light. Who? Who's coming? Before she could answer, the sound of boots echoed from the far end of the corridor. Yzara's pulse quickened. There was no mistaking it. Heavy footsteps, deliberate and calculated. They were already here. Darian cursed under his breath, glancing between Yzara and the darkening corridor. We need to move. Now. They turned, hurrying down the passage, the faint glow from the glowing symbols on the walls, casting eerie shadows behind them. The air felt heavier now, oppressive, as though the station itself was conspiring against them. Yzara could feel the weight of her father's wrath bearing down on her, and it fueled the fear coursing through her veins. Suddenly, the low hum of machinery ceased, and the air grew still. The silence was deafening. Then, from the shadows ahead, a voice cut through the stillness. Well, well, what do we have here? A tall figure emerged from the darkness. A bounty hunter cloaked in the sleek armor of the Emperor's elite enforcers. His face was hidden beneath a helmet, but his posture alone spoke volumes. He was a predator, and Yzara was his prey. The bounty hunter stepped forward, his footsteps echoing ominously in the silent corridor. Yzara, Princess of the Ninth Crown, he said, his voice cool and confident. You've caused quite a stir. The Emperor would like a word. Yzara's throat tightened. She had thought she'd escaped, thought she had found a brief respite in this forgotten place, but it seemed her fate was sealed once again. And this time, it wasn't just exile she had to fear, it was death. Darian stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. You don't have to do this. She's not what you think. Silence. The bounty hunter snapped, drawing a sleek blaster from his side. You have no say in this. Your queen is wanted, and your life is forfeit the moment you decided to stand by her. Yzara's eyes widened as the bounty hunter raised his blaster, but before she could react, Darian stepped in front of her, his stance firm. "Take me instead," Darian said, his voice low but resolute. "I'm nothing. I'm just a mechanic. Let her go." For a moment, the bounty hunter hesitated, his gaze shifting between the two of them. It was clear that this wasn't just about a royal order, it was about power, about dominance. Yzara's heart ached. This man, who had risked everything to help her, now stood in the line of fire because of her. She couldn't let him take the fall. "Darian, no," she cried, stepping forward. "I won't let you do this." The bounty hunter smirked beneath his helmet. "You think you can stop me, princess?" Without warning, he lunged toward them, but Darian was faster. With a swift motion, he knocked the blaster from the bounty hunter's hand, sending it skittering across the floor. The two men grappled, the sound of their struggle echoing through the corridor. Yzara's breath caught in her throat as she watched. Helpless. This was her fight now, and she wasn't going to run any longer. The struggle between Darian and the bounty hunter intensified. The sound of fists landing and boots shuffling echoing through the narrow corridor. Yzara watched, helpless, as Darian struggled to keep the much larger bounty hunter at bay. Her instincts screamed at her to help, but she had no weapons, no way to fight back. All she had was her mind, and a heart full of defiance. The bounty hunter's blaster lay forgotten on the floor, but that didn't mean they were safe. The station's silence, once a comfort, now felt like a heavy burden. Every creak in the walls, every hum of the ancient machinery made it clear that the bounty hunter wasn't working alone. "Darian," Yzara cried, her voice raw with desperation. "Get out of there." Darian's jaw was clenched as he maneuvered around the bounty hunter, trying to gain the upper hand. "I'm fine. Get to the control room, Yzara. Lock the door behind you." Her heart twisted. She couldn't just leave him, not after everything he'd done for her. But before she could move, a sharp, mechanical voice rang through the corridor. "Warning, intruder alert. All personnel must evacuate the station." The voice was cold, automated, and it made Yzara's blood run cold. "Shit," Darian muttered under his breath. "The whole station's going into lockdown." The bounty hunter seemed unfazed by the announcement, his focus still fixed on Darian. "You're just delaying the inevitable. She's already marked. The Emperor wants her back, dead or alive." Yzara felt a firelight within her. She had been cast aside, abandoned by her father, treated as nothing more than a pawn. But hearing the bounty hunter's words, something inside her snapped. She wasn't just going to be a victim. Not again. "No," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Not this time." She grabbed a nearby tool, a heavy wrench lying discarded on the floor, and stepped forward. Her grip tightened around the cold metal as she moved to help Darian. But before she could strike, the bounty hunter's eyes flicked toward her, his mouth curling into a predatory smile. "So, the princess thinks she can fight back?" He sneered, his hand reaching for his fallen blaster. In that moment, something inside Yzara shifted. Her time as a helpless, discarded princess was over. She was no longer the weakling her father had cast aside. With a roar of defiance, she lunged forward, swinging the wrench with all her strength. The blow landed, knocking the bounty hunter off balance. He staggered backward, and in that instant, Darian took the opportunity to tackle him to the ground. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Yzara felt like she had control over her own destiny. The bounty hunter groaned beneath Darian's weight, clearly stunned by the princess's unexpected attack. "Get to the control room," Darian shouted as he pinned the bounty hunter. "Now, Yzara, you have to shut this down." Yzara hesitated for a split second before nodding. She ran, the weight of her new resolve settling over her like armor. She was done being a pawn. The time for rebellion had come. Yzara ran, her footsteps quickening as she approached the control room. The station felt more alive than ever, its old systems creaking as if they too knew the weight of what was happening. Her mind swirled with the discovery, the hidden chamber, the glowing symbols, the ancient machinery. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place. When she reached the control room, she slammed her palm against the door. It opened with a heavy groan, revealing the dimly lit space beyond. Flickering lights cast long shadows over a terminal at the center of the room. With barely a thought, she approached it and activated the console. The screen flared to life, casting a pale glow over her face. Project Zephyr, the name burned into her memory as it flashed across the screen. She read the description with growing horror. The station wasn't just a relic, it was part of a larger, galactic-scale project. Project Zephyr was a system capable of manipulating entire sectors, controlling fleets, economies, even entire populations. The station was a nexus, a hidden hub, with the machine they had uncovered being one of its primary components. Her fingers hovered over the keys as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The Emperor hadn't abandoned her because of her appearance. No, he had cast her aside because he feared the power she might one day possess, the power of Project Zephyr. This machine could alter the course of galactic history, and she was the only one alive who could activate it. Her chest tightened as the gravity of it all hit her. Her exile had been no accident. The Emperor had known exactly what she was capable of, and he'd gone to extreme lengths to ensure she would never understand it. The terminal beeped as new information appeared. Hidden files, encrypted and buried for centuries, began to unravel before her. One file caught her attention. Activation protocol. Her breath hitched. If she followed the instructions, the station and the weapon would come to life. But the questions swirled in her mind. Should she activate it? Could she wield this kind of power without becoming what her father had feared? The temptation was overwhelming, but she also knew the cost could be more than she was willing to pay. She glanced over at Darian, who had entered quietly. His eyes were wide, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked softly. Yzara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I understand now. The Emperor wasn't just worried about my appearance, he was terrified of what I could become." Darian stepped closer, his voice steady. "So what now?" Yzara turned back to the terminal, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "I have to choose. The power is mine to control. But at what cost?" Yzara stood before the terminal, her fingers still hovering over the keys. The temptation to activate Project Zephyr, the power to change the galaxy, was overwhelming. But with the power came the realization that once she pressed that button, there would be no turning back. Her father had feared this moment, he had feared her potential, and now she understood why. But as she thought about her exile, the endless insults, the way her father had cast her aside like refuse, something shifted inside her. The pain she had carried for so long, the humiliation, the abandonment began to transform into something else: determination. The girl who had been discarded, overlooked, was no longer the same. She was more than a princess. She was a force in her own right. "I can't hide anymore," Yzara muttered to herself, as much a declaration as a realization. Darian stood in the corner, watching her, a silent presence. He could see the conflict in her eyes, but he didn't speak, giving her the space she needed. His trust in her was unwavering, and his quiet support was the one thing she had always needed, but never had. The weight of her father's rejection had always felt like a boulder on her chest. But now, with the knowledge of the station's power and what it could do, she realized she didn't need her father's approval. She didn't need anyone's permission. She could forge her own destiny, and if that meant using the power of Project Zephyr, then so be it. Yzara straightened, her shoulders squaring with newfound resolve. "I'm not going to hide anymore, Darian," she said, her voice steady. Darian's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Pride, maybe. But there was also something deeper, something unspoken, in the way he watched her. "You never had to," he replied, his voice low. "You just needed to see who you really are." With a deep breath, Yzara turned back to the terminal. Her hand hovered over the activation sequence for just a moment longer before she pressed the key. The machine hummed to life, the room shaking as the power surged through the station. The darkened room was illuminated with a blinding light, and for a moment, Yzara felt as if the weight of the galaxy had been lifted from her shoulders. She was no longer the discarded princess, the outcast. She was reborn, stronger, sharper, and more dangerous than she had ever been. But as the power surged, so did a realization. There was no going back. The Emperor would know she had activated the machine, and he would come for her with everything he had. Darian's voice broke through her thoughts. "It's done," Yzara turned to him, a determined look in her eyes. "Now, we do what I should have done long ago." Darian nodded, his expression now filled with certainty. "We fight." The room fell silent, the hum of the machine in the background, a constant reminder of the power at their fingertips. Yzara, once discarded, now stood ready to reclaim her throne and reshape the galaxy in her image. The station trembled, the floor vibrating beneath Yzara's feet as the full power of Project Zephyr came online. The blinding light slowly dimmed, replaced by a low hum that resonated deep in her chest. The power was immense, more than she had ever imagined. It coursed through the station, sending waves of energy across its many hidden systems. The machine was alive, and she had awakened it. Yzara stood tall, her gaze fixed on the terminal as the control room's lights flickered. "It's done," she whispered. "The Emperor won't be able to ignore this now." Darian stepped forward, his face drawn with concern. "Are you sure about this? You've just activated a weapon capable of rewriting the galaxy's future. The Emperor won't take this lightly." Yzara nodded, her heart pounding. "He won't stop until he gets it back. But I'm not afraid anymore. I know what I'm capable of." Before Darian could respond, the walls of the control room began to vibrate more violently. The air grew heavy, and Yzara felt the unmistakable presence of the Emperor's enforcers drawing near. The station was under attack. "They're here," Yzara said, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to leave. Now." Darian moved to the door, glancing over his shoulder. "There's a ship docked in the lower levels. It's a long shot, but it's our best chance." Yzara hesitated. The Emperor's soldiers were relentless. They would stop at nothing to bring her back, and this time they would have reinforcements. The bounty hunter had been just the beginning. "Darian," Yzara began, her voice trailing off as the reality of the situation hit her. "I can't let him take this from me. We have to fight. We can't run anymore." Darian's eyes softened, understanding the weight of her words. "Then let's make sure we're ready. Together." The two of them sprinted through the corridors, their footsteps echoing as alarms blared overhead. Yzara's mind raced. The Emperor's forces were closing in, and time was running out. But she was no longer the discarded princess she had once been. She was a leader now, and she would do whatever it took to hold on to the power she had just unlocked. As they reached the lower levels of the station, they found the docking bay in chaos. The Emperor's soldiers had already begun to search the area, and Yzara could see the dark shadows of their ships hovering just outside the station's walls. The weight of their presence was suffocating, but Yzara wasn't afraid. Not anymore. With Darian at her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The power of Project Zephyr flowed through her veins, and she would not be silenced. "You know what to do," she said to Darian, her voice firm. Darian nodded. "We fight." And as the first wave of soldiers descended on them, Yzara raised her head high, ready to face the battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The battle erupted with a deafening roar. The station's corridors became a war zone, blaring alarms blending with the sound of blaster fire. Yzara and Darian fought side by side, their movements fluid and synchronized, each strike and counterstrike a testament to the bond they had forged in the depths of exile. But Yzara's mind, sharp as ever, was not just focused on the immediate chaos. She had activated the power of Project Zephyr, and now the galaxy was watching, waiting for what came next. As they cleared the path to the hangar, Yzara could feel the weight of the decisions she had made crashing down on her. She had embraced the power that had once been hidden from her, but the cost was undeniable. The Emperor, her father, would not relent. Every choice she made now would ripple across the galaxy, affecting not just her fate, but the lives of billions. "We need to get to the ship," Darian called out, pulling her back from her thoughts. Yzara nodded, her jaw clenched. "We can't stop now. We need to make sure the weapon is activated fully. Once it is, the Emperor will have no choice but to face me." They reached the hangar, but the sight that met them was not the quiet sanctuary they had hoped for. The Emperor's elite forces were already there, their ships lined up, weapons primed. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. But Yzara didn't hesitate. Her training as a princess had never prepared her for war, but she had learned from Darian. She was no longer just a figurehead in a palace. She was a leader, one who would fight for her place, not just in the galaxy, but in history. As the soldiers advanced, Yzara took a deep breath, reaching within herself for the power of Project Zephyr. The machine was linked to her now, its energy coursing through her veins. With a steady hand, she activated the station's weapon systems. Energy cannons along the walls flared to life, firing in synchronized bursts that sent the enemy soldiers scattering. Darian grinned, his eyes filled with approval. That's the way. But even as the enemy forces retreated, Yzara knew this was just the beginning. She had unlocked the power, but with it came an immense responsibility. The galaxy would change, but not without a cost. The Emperor's forces were not easily defeated, and their retaliation would be swift and brutal. The weight of leadership pressed down on her, heavy with the knowledge that she had become the one force capable of challenging the Emperor's reign. She had reclaimed her birthright, but the price of that power would come for her too. "We're not done yet," Yzara said, her voice steady, but the burden of her words heavy. "This fight is just beginning." With Darian beside her, she boarded the ship, her heart resolute. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on. The galaxy had underestimated her once. Now, they would see what she was truly capable of. The ship's engines hummed to life, and Yzara felt the slight lurch beneath her feet as the vessel rose from the station's surface. The vastness of space stretched out before them, an endless expanse filled with uncertainty, yet Yzara felt a strange calm wash over her. The power of Project Zephyr was within her grasp, and the thought of facing her father, the Emperor, no longer filled her with fear. Darian stood beside her, eyes focused on the stars ahead. He hadn't said much since their escape, and Yzara could feel the tension between them. He had always been by her side, unwavering in his support. But something had shifted. He had been hesitant ever since the battle in the hangar, his movements distant, his gaze guarded. Yzara glanced at him, her brow furrowed. "Darian, what's going on? You've been quiet." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, his jaw tight as though he were struggling with something inside. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Yzara. I can't do this." Yzara's heart skipped. "What do you mean? We're in this together." "I thought we were," he replied, his voice shaking slightly. "But I can't be a part of this anymore." The words hit Yzara like a physical blow. Betrayal. It stung, sharper than anything she had ever felt. "You're abandoning me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "After everything we've been through?" Darian looked away, his eyes pained. "I'm not abandoning you. I can't stand by while you do this. You're becoming what your father feared, Yzara. The power is changing you. I can feel it. You're not the same person you were when we first met." Yzara recoiled, a surge of anger rising within her. "You think I'm becoming like him? My father? I'm taking back what was always mine. I'm doing what no one else had the courage to do. This power, this machine, it's the key to freedom. I don't want freedom like this," Darian said, his voice cracking. "You're not the person I thought you were. You're becoming a weapon, and I can't stand by and watch you destroy yourself." The words hit her harder than any battle could. Yzara stood frozen, her heart breaking as she realized what Darian was really saying. He wasn't afraid of the Emperor. He was afraid of her. "I don't need anyone's approval," Yzara said, her voice cold as ice. "Not anymore." She turned away from him, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The pain of the betrayal mingled with the cold steel of her resolve. She had never needed anyone, not even Darian. She had always been destined for greatness, and now, with the power of Project Zephyr at her fingertips, she was unstoppable. But as the silence stretched between them, a small part of her ached for the trust she had lost, and for the man who had once stood by her side. The ship cut through the dark expanse of space, its engines humming steadily as Yzara stared at the looming silhouette of the Emperor's fortress. The weight of her father's empire had always felt distant to her, an oppressive force she couldn't escape. But now, with the power of Project Zephyr coursing through her veins, she felt ready. She was not the discarded princess anymore. She was the one who would claim her birthright. As the ship neared the massive obsidian palace, Yzara's grip tightened on the controls. The Emperor's defense systems flared to life, sending streams of fire toward them. But Yzara didn't flinch. Her fingers danced across the console, activating the station's weapons, and the ship's shields absorbed the barrage effortlessly. She had unlocked the power of Project Zephyr, and it was more than enough to level anything that stood in her way. "We're going in," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. Darian, standing behind her, said nothing, his silence a constant reminder of his betrayal. She pushed the sting of his words aside. Now wasn't the time to dwell on that. The ship rumbled as they broke through the atmosphere, and the great gates of the palace opened, an invitation or a challenge Yzara couldn't decide. But she was done waiting. The ship accelerated, cutting through the defenses with ease. The palace walls trembled, the shockwaves reverberating through the metal structure. "Ready yourself," Yzara muttered as the ship descended toward the throne room. Blaster fire rained down from every direction, but Yzara's fingers moved quickly, firing the weapons systems. Energy pulses collided with the oncoming fire, disintegrating it instantly. The palace's outer defenses fell within moments, and the doors to the throne room slid open, revealing her father. The Emperor stood tall, his regal form a stark contrast to the anger that burned in his eyes. His presence filled the room, as imposing as ever, but Yzara stood unshaken. "You've come to die, daughter," he sneered. His voice boomed across the room, the fury in it making the air feel thick. "You think you can take my throne?" Yzara stepped forward, her face unwavering. "No, father, I've come to take what's mine." She wasn't the frightened girl who had been cast aside. The years of rejection had fueled her resolve. Her voice was steady as she spoke, each word carrying the weight of everything she had overcome. The Emperor's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "You are nothing, you always will be." Yzara's lips curved into a small, defiant smile. "I am everything, father. I am the future." With a single motion, she activated the full force of Project Zephyr. The room trembled as the power surged, a hum of energy filling the space. The Emperor staggered back, his eyes wide in shock. But it was too late. The power of the machine coursed through the palace, shaking its very foundations. The walls cracked, and the throne room echoed with the sound of collapse. Yzara stood tall, her eyes locked on the Emperor, knowing that this moment would define the galaxy's future. It wasn't about revenge, it was about a new world. And in that world, no one would ever cast her aside again. The dust settled in the throne room, the once grand and imposing walls now cracked and crumbling under the weight of Project Zephyr's unleashed power. Yzara stood at the center, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the machine's activation. The Emperor, her father, lay defeated on the ground, his eyes wide with disbelief. The once mighty ruler of the galaxy, reduced to nothing more than a broken man. Yzara looked down at him, her heart numb. She had done it. She had overthrown him, claimed the power that had been denied to her for so long, but the victory didn't feel as sweet as she had imagined. The cost of the battle, the destruction, the lives lost, it all hung heavily on her shoulders. Darian stepped forward, his presence a quiet reminder of the path she had taken to get here. "It's over," he said softly, his voice filled with a strange mix of relief and sadness. Yzara didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, but it was no longer filled with thoughts of revenge or power. Now, she understood the weight of leadership, the responsibility that came with the crown. The galaxy had been torn apart by her father's rule, and it would take more than just defeating him to heal the wounds. She glanced at Darian, his face as unreadable as it had been since the moment of his betrayal. "I've done it. I've won," she whispered, almost to herself. "But what now?" Darian's eyes softened, and he walked closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Now you rebuild. You do what he couldn't. You lead with wisdom, compassion, and strength. The galaxy needs a new kind of ruler." Yzara looked out over the ruins of the throne room. She could hear the distant sounds of the remaining loyalists rallying, the flicker of communication systems activating as the galaxy began to stir again. The fight was over, but the work had only just begun. The Emperor's reign was no more, but the galaxy was still fractured, still broken. The wars, the greed, the corruption, it would all take time to heal. And Yzara was no fool. She knew that the power she had claimed came with immense responsibility. There would be opposition. There would be those who wanted to see her fail. But for the first time, Yzara didn't feel afraid. She was ready. "I will not make the same mistakes," she said firmly, her voice strong. "I will rebuild, but I won't do it alone." Darian nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. "We'll rebuild it together." As they stood in the shattered remnants of her father's empire, Yzara felt the weight of the crown settle onto her head. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. The galaxy had been torn apart by the cruelty of one man. Now, it would be healed by the will of one woman. And in her hands, the future was no longer uncertain. It was hers to shape.